The galaxy's mightiest fleets collided, but it was a human ship that won. In the vast expanse of space where peace reigned for centuries, no one expected the sudden storm that would rip through the galaxy, especially not the humans, who had only recently become part of the galactic community. The galaxy had been a place of uneasy alliances, each faction wary of the others but held together by the weight of mutual interests. The Federation, an amalgamation of the most powerful alien species, had been the backbone of that peace, holding a monopoly on military might, diplomacy, and galactic trade. They patrolled the borders of their vast domain with overwhelming fleets and a sense of unshakable superiority. Humans, with their relatively short history in space and modest technological capabilities, had barely scratched the surface of galactic politics, their fleet often dismissed as a mere blip on the radar of galactic warfare. But everything changed in the blink of an eye when the Zaldarians, a race of ruthless conquerors whose technology was superior and whose ambition was boundless, launched a brutal surprise attack on the Federation's border colonies. The first waves of destruction hit before anyone could react, and the Federation, once an impenetrable force, found itself stretched thin and ill-prepared. Commander Rachel Moore had never seen anything like it. As the commander of the USS Invictus, Earth's lone flagship, Moore had always known that humanity was considered a secondary player in galactic affairs, a position that was both frustrating and motivating. Her ship was small, untested, and grossly underfunded compared to the massive warships of the Federation and Zaldarian fleets. Yet it was the only ship left in the region with any capacity for defense, and Moore knew that their survival depended not on brute force, but on a different kind of strength: ingenuity, unpredictability, and above all, human willpower. The mine Invictus had been designed with that very principle in mind, a hybrid vessel combining experimental technologies with older, trusted human designs. While it lacked the raw firepower of the Federation's warships, it was agile, versatile, and capable of adapting to situations where larger fleets could not. Moore's eyes never left the view screen, where the once brilliant Federation capital was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin, the aftermath of an attack that had claimed countless lives. The Federation's greatest strength had turned into its greatest weakness. Their overconfidence in their superior numbers and firepower had blinded them to the Zaldarians' ruthlessness and speed. The Invictus had been called into service as a last-ditch effort to provide support, but Moore knew that the Federation's fleet was on the brink of collapse. They needed help, desperately. The Federation's military command had pleaded for reinforcements, but their messages were met with silence. Earth's small fleet, with only a few vessels in working order, was unable to provide any meaningful support. Moore, however, saw an opportunity. The Invictus might be small, but it could still make a difference in ways no one expected. Her orders were clear: find a way to disrupt the Zaldarian advance, buy time for reinforcements, and perhaps even salvage a chance for a counterattack. Yet she knew that this was no ordinary mission. In this new galactic war, humanity's survival was at stake. Moore's mind raced as she stood on the bridge, the hum of the ship's engines beneath her feet and the distant glow of the stars just beyond the viewport. The Invictus had never been built for full-scale combat. It was designed for exploration, for diplomacy. But this was no longer about diplomacy. This was survival, and Moore would stop at nothing to protect her crew, her ship, and Earth. "Status report," Moore barked, her voice cutting through the tense silence that had settled over the bridge. The crew, a diverse mix of humans and Federation allies, all glanced up at her with a blend of fear and determination in their eyes. Lieutenant Kalis, her tactical officer, was the first to respond, his voice tight but controlled. "The Zaldarians are advancing, Commander. We've intercepted multiple fleet signals. There are at least 5 dreadnoughts heading this way, along with several support ships. Our sensors show no sign of Federation reinforcements." Moore's heart sank. 5 dreadnoughts were more than enough to overwhelm any single ship, let alone a ship as small as the Invictus. But there was one advantage the Invictus had that the Zaldarians couldn't predict. It could move faster than any of their ships thanks to its hybrid propulsion system. It was a wild card, unpredictable, unorthodox, and exactly the kind of weapon the Federation had overlooked. "We can't fight them head-on, but we don't have to," Moore said, her voice steady, even as she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "We're going to hit them where they don't expect it. We'll use our speed and stealth to strike at their weak points. It's the only way we stand a chance." The crew exchanged nervous but hopeful glances. They had no choice but to trust her. The Invictus wasn't built for all-out war, but it was built to survive, and Moore knew that survival was their only option. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Target the nearest support ship and prepare to engage. If we can cripple their supply lines, we might just slow them down long enough for reinforcements to arrive." The crew sprang into action. The hum of the ship's engines grew louder as the Invictus accelerated, weaving its way through asteroid fields and debris. It was a risky maneuver, one that pushed the ship to its limits, but Moore wasn't about to back down now. As they approached the first Zeldarian vessel, the Invictus dropped out of warp, moving with blinding speed as it closed in on the unsuspecting enemy. The Zeldarians, accustomed to overwhelming firepower and sheer numbers, were caught off guard. Moore's tactical plan was simple: strike hard, strike fast, and disappear before they could retaliate. As the first round of plasma fire hit the Zeldarian vessel, Moore felt a flicker of hope. The Invictus might be small, but it was relentless. And for the first time since the war had begun, the crew of the Invictus had a chance to make their mark. For humanity, the battle for survival had only just begun. The USS Invictus had barely escaped the first strike, and Commander Rachel Moore knew that the odds were against them. The crew had carried out their hit-and-run maneuvers with precision, but every success felt like it came at a cost. The Zeldarians weren't fools. They would adapt, and soon there wouldn't be any places left for the Invictus to hide. Yet Moore couldn't afford to think about retreat, not when Earth's survival hung in the balance. The mission was clear: continue striking where the Zeldarians least expected it, keep them off balance and buy time, but time was running out. As the Invictus soared through the empty expanse of space, its engines humming with an almost nervous energy, Moore gathered her senior officers in the war room, a small, dimly lit chamber at the heart of the ship. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her like a physical force. Every move she made would be scrutinized, and if she failed, the crew of the Invictus, and possibly humanity itself, would pay the price. "They're closing in," Moore said, her voice steady but tinged with a rare hint of frustration. "The Zeldarians know we're not going to go down without a fight, and we've been getting lucky with our attacks. But luck won't last forever." Lieutenant Kalis, the tactical officer, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed as he reviewed the fleet data on the holographic display. "They've already dispatched reinforcements, Commander. Several smaller ships are joining the main fleet. The Zeldarians are using their numbers against us. If we continue attacking head-on, we'll be overwhelmed." Moore stared at the data, weighing her options. The Invictus was outmatched in firepower, and their hit-and-run tactics had worked well so far, but the Zeldarians were relentless. Their ships were fast, heavily armed, and equipped with advanced AI that could anticipate most human tactics. The Federation had underestimated them, but Moore couldn't afford that mistake. She had to outthink them. She had to show that humans could adapt faster than any of the galaxy's supposedly superior forces. "We need to split their fleet," Moore said, her mind racing. "We can't keep playing defense. It's time to make them question their superiority." "Lieutenant Commander." Drayton, her second-in-command, looked up from the table, his brow furrowing. "How do you plan on splitting a fleet that outnumbers us 10-1? Moore paused for a moment, her mind assembling a plan from fragments of information, tactics learned from years of military simulations, and most importantly, her deep understanding of the limitations of the Invictus and the Zeldarians. "We'll use their arrogance against them. Zeldarians rely too heavily on their ship's firepower and their ability to overwhelm opponents with sheer numbers. They don't expect someone to fight back with intelligence. They think we'll try to take them head-on, but we won't. Instead, we'll create chaos." Drayton's eyes widened slightly. "Chaos?" Moore nodded, her face hardening. We'll sow confusion in their ranks. We'll exploit their weaknesses, break their formation, and make them waste time on multiple fronts. If we make them scatter, we can hit their weaker points and cause enough disruption to buy us more time. The room fell silent as the crew absorbed the gravity of her words. "Commander," Callis said slowly, "if we go forward with this, it'll be a one-way trip for the Invictus. We'll be caught in the middle of their fleet. We don't have the firepower to survive a prolonged engagement." Moore met his gaze, her eyes unflinching. "We won't be caught. We'll strike fast and leave before they know what hit them." She turned toward Drayton. "I need you to make sure. We can run once the attack begins. Keep our engines in working order. We'll need every bit of speed we can get." Drayton nodded, the tension in his jaw visible. "Understood, Commander." Moore turned to the rest of the crew, her voice unwavering. "This is our only shot. We have to make it count." As the Invictus sped toward the heart of the Zeldarian fleet, Moore's mind worked furiously, calculating every variable, every possible outcome. The plan was dangerous, but what choice did they have? The Federation's fleets were nowhere to be found, and humanity's hope lay in their ability to outmaneuver and outwit their enemies. They couldn't afford to make mistakes. The Invictus dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zeldarian. Fleet's reach and the sheer scale of the enemy armada was enough to make anyone's heart race. Dreadnoughts, cruisers, and destroyers filled the view screen, their weapons primed and ready for war. Yet, amidst the chaos of this overwhelming force, the Invictus was little more than a speck. But it was a speck that could move with a speed and precision none of the Zeldarian ships could match. The crew of the Invictus sprang into action as if driven by an instinct honed through years of training and experience. They moved quickly, setting the course that would carry them deep into the heart of the Zeldarian fleet, but they weren't aiming for the largest ships. No. The plan was more subtle. They aimed for the weak points, the communication relays, the supply ships, the unguarded sections of the Zeldarian formation. Every shot was precise, every move calculated, and with each strike, Moore's pulse quickened as the battle unfolded. The first attack came in a flurry of rapid fire, a precision strike against a Zeldarian supply ship that was strategically placed just behind the main line of battle. With a single shot, the ship was disabled, its engine core erupting in a brilliant explosion. For a brief moment, the entire Zeldarian fleet faltered as their communication networks scrambled. The chaos was palpable, but Moore knew it was only the beginning. The Invictus darted through the confusion, a ghost in the midst of a galaxy at war. The crew didn't pause. They kept moving, hitting smaller targets, disrupting enemy sensors, and attacking wherever they could cause the most chaos. But the Zeldarians were quick to react. Their AI systems, designed to counter any human tactic, began adapting. Soon they recognized the Invictus as the source of the disruption, and a Zeldarian dreadnought broke from formation, aiming its weapons directly at the human ship. Moore's heart raced. The Invictus was fast, but the dreadnought was faster, and its firepower was overwhelming. They couldn't outrun it forever. "Brace for impact," Moore shouted. But even as she spoke, she knew it was too late. The Zeldarian ship's weapons locked onto them, and the first blast hit the shields. The Invictus shuddered violently, throwing Moore against the command console. The ship's systems flickered and the lights dimmed, but Moore wasn't done yet. "All crew, maintain course," she shouted, gripping the armrests of her seat as the ship bucked again under another wave of enemy fire. The Invictus was damaged, but it wasn't out of the fight. "We've got to finish what we started," Moore muttered to herself as she scanned the battlefield. "We've come too far to back down now." With the last reserves of energy, the Invictus fired its primary weapon, targeting a key Zeldarian ship. The blast tore through the enemy vessel, and for the briefest of moments the Invictus seemed to stand victorious, a beacon of human defiance against an overwhelming enemy. The crew erupted in a mixture of relief and awe, but Moore knew this was just the beginning. The Zeldarians were still out there, and the battle was far from over. The Invictus had made its mark, but in this war, every victory came with a cost. The USS Invictus had survived the battle, but barely. The ship groaned under the strain of multiple hull breaches, and the shields were down to their last reserves. But Commander Rachel Moore wasn't about to let this moment define their fate. The Zaldarian dreadnought had been a close call and the crew was shaken, but they still had one thing the Zaldarians didn't: the will to fight. Moore stood at the helm, looking out at the wreckage of the battlefield, the remnants of the once pristine Zaldarian fleet scattered across the black expanse of space. It was a sight that should have filled her with pride, but instead all she felt was exhaustion, a weariness that came not just from the physical toll of battle, but from the weight of what was to come. There would be no more skirmishes, no more hit-and-run tactics. The Zaldarians would retaliate with everything they had. And when they did, the Invictus might not make it out. She couldn't afford to think like that, though. If the crew saw her faltering, if they sensed doubt, it would break them. Instead, she pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. "Status report," Moore called, her voice steady but strained. Lieutenant Callis, the tactical officer, quickly assessed the situation, his face a mask of professionalism. "Shields are at 12%, Commander. Engines are holding steady, but we've taken significant damage to the starboard side. I recommend we make repairs immediately or risk becoming a sitting target." Moore nodded, her mind already calculating their next move. "Get the engineers to work. We can't afford to sit still for long, but we need to be functional." Callis hesitated, then spoke again, his voice low. "There's something else, Commander. We've picked up an unknown signal on the long-range scanners. It's faint, but it's unlike anything we've seen before. It's coming from a nearby system, farther than the Zaldarian fleet's main base." Moore's heart skipped a beat. This could be their salvation, or it could be a trap. She turned to Drayton, her second in command. "What do you think?" Drayton, always the pragmatist, leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "It's a gamble, Commander. If we go to investigate, we risk running into another Zaldarian force. If we stay here and make repairs, we'll be vulnerable to another attack. We're running out of time." Moore's mind raced, but one thought emerged clear. They couldn't afford to stay, not with the Zaldarians already regrouping. They had to take a risk. "Set course for the source of the signal," she ordered. "We'll take our chances. If it's a trap, we'll fight our way out. If it's a lifeline, then we've just earned ourselves a fighting chance." Drayton hesitated, his hand hovering over the navigation console, then nodded. "Aye, Commander. Setting course now." The Invictus jolted forward, its engines straining against the damage it had sustained. The crew worked in perfect harmony, pulling together despite the exhaustion and fear that weighed on them. There was no time for doubt. The ship had become more than a vessel. It was a symbol, a lifeline, and it carried with it the hopes of humanity. As they approached the source of the signal, Moore felt a growing sense of anticipation. The Zaldarian fleet had been relentless, but so had they, and now they were about to face something unknown. The Invictus dropped out of hyperspace, and before them lay an uncharted system, a nebula, its colors a kaleidoscope of blues and purples, swirling in the distance. The signal was coming from the center of the nebula, and Moore could make out the faint outline of a station. It was unlike anything she had ever seen before. Its architecture was intricate, almost organic in nature, and it seemed to pulse with a strange energy. This was not a Zaldarian station, nor was it anything remotely human. "What is this place?" Callis muttered, eyes glued to the readout. "It's ancient. This structure doesn't match anything in our database." Moore's instincts told her to proceed with caution, but every part of her knew that they couldn't afford to waste any more time. They needed to investigate, to find out if this station held the answers they desperately sought. "Prepare a boarding team," Moore ordered. "We'll send a team down to the station. If there's any technology we can salvage or any answers we can find, we need to know." Drayton stepped forward, his expression grim. "Commander, we're in no shape for a full-scale boarding operation. The station could be a trap." "It could," Moore agreed, "but it's a risk we have to take. If this is a lifeline, it could turn the tide of the war." Drayton didn't argue further. The decision had been made. The Invictus deployed a shuttle and a small boarding party. Moore, Drayton, Callus, and a handful of other crew members made their way toward the station. The shuttle's descent was smooth, but the air inside was thick with tension. Each of them was aware that this could be their last mission, that the Zeldarians would likely be closing in at that very moment. But they kept moving, pushing forward, into the unknown. The station was eerily silent as they disembarked, the only sound the hiss of their boots against the metallic floor. Moore's breath came in short bursts, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the presence of something older than anything they had encountered before. The station was alive in a way that made her skin crawl. The corridors twisted and turned in impossible ways, and strange symbols adorned the walls, symbols that didn't belong to any known civilization. But what caught her attention most was the faint hum of energy emanating from deeper within the station. It was powerful, yet controlled. They followed the sound moving through the darkened halls. Every step felt like an eternity, and the sense of unease grew heavier with each passing moment. Then they reached it, a central chamber, its walls lined with strange crystalline structures that pulsed with an inner light. At the center of the room was a massive device, its purpose unclear, but its energy unmistakable. "What is this?" Callus breathed, eyes wide with awe. "It's a power source," Moore said, her voice trembling despite herself. "But it's unlike anything we've ever seen." She stepped closer, examining the device. It wasn't just a power source. It was something far more significant, something ancient, powerful, and undeniably alien. "This could be the key to winning the war," Moore said quietly, her mind racing. "We need to bring this back to the Invictus. Whatever this is, it's our ticket to turning the tide." But as she turned to signal her crew to begin the extraction, a voice ancient and cold echoed through the chamber. "You should not have come here." The voice was not human. It was something older, something wiser, and something far more dangerous than anything they had encountered before. The crew froze. The hairs on the back of Moore's neck stood on end as a presence, an intelligence, seemed to fill the room. The war had just become something far more complicated. The voice that echoed through the chamber was not just a warning. It was a challenge. The crew stood frozen in place, their minds racing as they tried to comprehend what was happening. The chamber, with its pulsing crystals and ancient energy, seemed alive, as though the station itself was aware of their presence. Commander Moore's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just an alien power source, this was something far more significant, and whatever it was watching them. The cold ancient voice spoke again, but this time, it felt like the entire station shuddered in response, as though the entity, whatever it was about to reveal its true nature. "You have come to claim what is not yours," the voice intoned. "The power you seek is not for you. It will burn you just as it has burned others before." Moore didn't flinch. She couldn't. The fate of humanity was at stake. "We didn't come to claim your power," she said firmly, her voice steady. "We came to stop a war. We came to survive." Silence followed her words. Then, slowly, the presence in the chamber seemed to shift, as though it were considering her response. The air grew thicker, and the temperature in the room dropped, but Moore held her ground. She had no choice but to stand firm. Drayton stepped forward, his voice laced with urgency. "Commander, we don't have time. The Zeldarians will be here, soon. We need to take this back to the Invictus. Whatever it is, it could turn the tide of the war." The voice responded, but it was no longer cold or threatening. Instead, it was curious, almost as if it was contemplating something ancient and long forgotten. "You are not the first to seek what lies within this station," it said, its tone shifting. "The Zeldarians too sought its power. They were consumed by it. What makes you different, human?" Moore's breath hitched. This was it, the moment that would define the future of humanity. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. They had come here for survival, for victory. But was it worth risking everything? Was the price too high? She thought of her crew, of the people she had sworn to protect, and of the countless lives that had already been lost in the war. She couldn't let them die for nothing, "We're not here for power," Moore said, her voice unwavering. "We're here for hope. We're here for the future of humanity. If we die trying, then at least we die with purpose." The voice seemed to acknowledge her words. The air around them shifted again, growing heavy with an ancient energy that filled the room. The crystals lining the walls pulsed, their glow intensifying. Moore stepped closer to the device at the center of the room, feeling its pull, the strange energy calling to her. She reached out, her hand hovering over the core of the device, and for a moment, everything went still. Then, with a rush of energy, the device activated. A blinding light filled the room, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away. The crew shielded their eyes as the station hummed with power. The walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by an ethereal, infinite space that stretched on forever. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the light faded. The station's hum slowed to a soft, rhythmic pulse, and the room returned to its previous form. But something had changed. Moore felt it in the pit of her stomach. The energy, the ancient power that had been contained within the station, had been unlocked, and it was now in their hands. But at what cost? Moore turned to face her crew. They were standing at the edge of the chamber, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. "What just happened?" Callus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this ours to control now?" Moore didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure if it was theirs to control, or if they had merely unlocked a force that was beyond their comprehension. The decision they had made could either save humanity or doom it. But there was no turning back now. The ancient voice spoke once more, its tone strangely calm. "You have chosen to claim what is beyond your understanding. The power you seek will reshape your future. But be warned, it is not a gift. It is a burden. What you do with it will determine the fate of your species." Moore's gaze hardened. She understood now this wasn't just about winning the war. It was about something much larger. The power they had unlocked wasn't just a weapon. It was a choice. They could use it to destroy their enemies, or they could use it to rebuild. And that was the question. What kind of future did humanity want? "We didn't come here to destroy," Moore said firmly, her voice echoing through the chamber. "We came here to survive, and we will build a future worth fighting for." There was no immediate response from the station, but Moore felt something shift in the air, a subtle change, like the balance of power had shifted in their favor. They had made the right choice. The light around them faded as the device powered down, and the station seemed to go quiet. The crew gathered around, still processing the gravity of the moment. "We've got what we came for," Moore said, her voice steady. "Now let's get back to the Invictus and make sure we don't waste this opportunity." They made their way back to the shuttle, the atmosphere tense but hopeful. As they lifted off from the station, Moore couldn't help but look back at the ancient structure. It had given them something dangerous, something powerful. But in the end, it was humanity's will, their choices, that would shape the future. The Invictus returned to the fleet, its journey now a turning point. In the war. As Moore stood on the bridge watching the stars stretch before them, she felt a surge of determination. The Zaldarians might be a powerful enemy, but humanity was stronger. They had faced their greatest challenge and emerged with a weapon unlike any other. But it wasn't just the weapon that would win the war. It was the choices they made, the alliances they forged, and the future they built together. "Set course for the Zaldarian homeworld," Moore ordered, her voice resolute. "It's time to end this war." The Invictus surged forward, cutting through the stars, its crew united in purpose. The war was far from over, but Commander Moore knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, humanity would face it head-on, with the strength to overcome anything. They were no longer just survivors in a galaxy at war. They were the ones who would shape the future.